Welcome to the ATA podcast, where we talk to former elite athletes sharing their insights and wisdom derived from successfully transitioning into life beyond the game. A very warm welcome to the Athlete Transition Accelerator podcast. Carl and I, once again, are joined by another fascinating guest. Today, it's James Daly, a former professional footballer, a guy who's played in Ireland, Scotland, the youth structures of the Premier League, multiple clubs in between on that journey, and now works in finance with Morgan Stanley. So, James, a very warm welcome. Thank you for your time. We're looking forward to sort of exploring that journey of transition together.
Yeah, thank you very much. Cheers, guys, for having me on. I'm very excited. I mean, especially kind of the caliber of guests that you've had on prior to me. I think you've done a great job in kind of bigging me up and trying to put me in the same sphere as some of them. But I'll do my best.
Well, it's lovely to have you, and thank you for the compliment. Obviously, it's very easy for Carl and I. We just sit here and ask the questions, and you're right. The more people we talk to, the more people approach us to want to be a part of this. So, yeah, your self-deprecation aside, I know this is going to be very helpful. So before we jump in, James, we always ask every guest just to take us back to a particular memory or a particular highlight. We're talking very much about transition. We're talking very much about what comes after sport. But everybody's dedicated so much of their life and their energy to try and achieve things in sport in that first chapter. So now that you're not playing professional football anymore, when you look back at all those years and starting very young as you did, is there a particular memory or a particular moment that brings forth a real sense of pride for you?
Yeah, I think the biggest sense of pride has to be representing my country. So playing for Ireland, despite the accent, kind of originally from Dublin, my whole family are Irish. So playing for Ireland and was the first time over in Portugal. I just look back on that with immense pride. I mean, it's something that can never be taken away from you. You know, obviously, I didn't go and play for the first team with Ireland, but at youth international levels, it's still the first time that you play and you wear the jersey that just kind of resonates to me. I don't actually keep much sport memorabilia at home, and like sort of medals and awards and stuff are actually in a box in the shed, but I have my international debut shirt up in the house, so I've kept that one.
Yeah, fabulous. Good for you. And it's interesting how humble so many sportsmen and women are. People often achieve things at age grade representative and then, but I didn't play all there's always that but. We hear it all the time. Actually, no, there are millions of men and women all around the world in every discipline that would give the right arms speaking to say, oh, I made it to represent my country, to pull on that international shirt, to sing the national anthem and go out and represent, you know, my country, my family, etc. So no, that's a lovely memory. Now, just diving straight into the transition element then. Obviously, you spent time as a young man in those elite academy structures within the Premiership, within the Premier League, with Chelsea, with QPR. And then your first transition probably would have been, without me putting words in your mouth, as a young man, as a teenager, stepping through that process, and only a tiny fraction of people make it. And this isn't in any way being disrespectful of the wonderful achievements that you went on to make, James. But can you just take us to that first transition? Because I imagine from being very young, your focus was, I'm going to play Premiership football. That's where I'm going. As we said, it's very hard to make that step. And you had your first transition in sport probably was, right, well, what do I do next? It's not necessarily going to be in the Premiership. And how you dealt with that, processed that when you're still a very young man, and without perhaps the support to go through it, or did you have a lot of support? Take us back to that moment in time, James.
Yeah, sure. So I think you have a different perspective when you look back. If you'd have asked me at the time when I was leaving QPR, and you know, I was kind of fortunate at the time to know that I had an opportunity to go up to Derby County, I still firmly believed that I was going to play in the Premier League. So there was that sort of complete belief that that's no problem. Everybody has different routes. You know, you need to make sure that you're playing and have a manager that likes you and go and get an opportunity. So from my perspective, I didn't see leaving QPR as, right, I'm now looking at a first transition. Probably in hindsight, I'd say that. But at the time, you know, that wasn't the case. I didn't see it that way. I think the main kind of consideration really, is, you know, you look at where you think you're going to get the best opportunity. And, you know, QPR at the time was that period where we signed multiple players across 2 or 3 transfer windows, greats from internationals, World Cup heroes, kind of Champions League winners. So there were so many players there that realistically I knew that was never going to break into the first team, despite Mark Hughes kind of giving me my first opportunity with the first team and being in and around it. It wasn't going to make sense to stay at the club regardless. So yeah, I mean, it's more of a hindsight thing that I look at in terms of making that first transition. But I think it's the first time you are challenged as a young man, right? You kind of go through, successful periods in terms of, sort of school career. I captained England schoolboys from like 13 to 16, and then played for QPR and internationally. And you're kind of used to a certain level of success. And then the first time you get that knockback, it's how do you respond from that? And I think whether you believe it or not, you almost tell yourself, well, I need to have this really strong mental attitude. I need to still believe that I'm making it back to the Premier League regardless.
Yeah, and that's a great answer, James. That ties very much into the competitive mindset that every athlete's got, that, well, I'll show you and I'll take the opportunity elsewhere and I'll come back. So that makes absolute sense. Now, obviously, I'm not in any way accelerating you to the end of your career, because there's lots of substance and great stories and things within that. But for the benefit of people that are then processing, and the whole raison d'etre of this podcast is helping people transition beyond that. At what point did that realization start to set in then, that actually perhaps I want to be exploring something in finance? Obviously, you've got a fabulous role now at Morgan Stanley. When did that start to appear in your thinking that, okay, I'm enjoying my football, but I'm starting to think about the next chapter?
Yeah, I think in order to answer that question, I need to root it back to the start in terms of kind of from GCSE age, and credit my parents a little bit on this. So when I was training with Chelsea and it was coming up to that period of whether I leave school or not, my parents at the time were adamant that they wanted me to complete A-levels alongside football. And so actually with me, or sort of partly on my behalf, they negotiated with QPR that when I signed my contract there, that I was able to do A-levels. So I studied kind of twice a week after training and did 3 A-levels. And at the time, I was completely against the idea, right? It's any kind of 16-year-old boy is signing for a Premier League club and you're leaving school. I mean, the last thing I wanted to do was then study in the evenings, right? And kind of when the other boys are out spending their money or going to Nando's, I was kind of studying and felt a little bit isolated. But what I will say is that kind of ingrained or instilled an attitude or a mentality there where I believed that by educating yourself and keeping your brain smart and keeping you focused on things outside of your day-to-day career could actually benefit you on the pitch. So if I fast forward then to the age of 23, 24, and kind of living in Scotland and, without family and friends there, definitely had more time on my hands. I kind of went, actually, I did this when I was younger. Let's give myself something to keep my mind fresh, keep me sharp. And I enrolled in a business economics and finance degree. And I initially told myself, this is purely to have it, to have in the back pocket, to sit on. And then ultimately, when I came to sort of 27, 28 and coronavirus hit, it was actually a chance to take stock, sit there and go, actually, without football, this is what it's going to look like in potentially 2 or 3 years' time if I'm not released or injured. And I kind of made a logical decision to apply to the ex-professional athlete program at Morgan Stanley, given sort of I had this basis, and then had a decision to make, really, sort of head versus heart. Do I go and kind of prioritize a career that has sort of hopefully a little bit more security but longevity, or kind of continue doing what you love and you dreamed of and play football for potentially a couple more years?
No, and that's it. That's a great timeline, James. And again, for people listening, it's so important that we sort of almost reflect back some of these points, because you've touched on several of them there. One, your support network's so important. And when we're young, more perhaps than when we're a bit more mature, it's even more important to find people we can trust. And that's why this podcast is important, because perhaps you've got really supportive parents as you had, perhaps you don't. Perhaps you've got mentors within your club and your youth structure, perhaps you don't. But the principle of still investing in your education, still investing in your mind, is not something that's going to land. And as you said, it didn't land well with you. It doesn't land necessarily when people go, oh, there's the promised land. And sport is
Mm,
so brutal, so competitive, and we don't want it to happen to anybody, but particularly in contact sports, injuries can come at any moment. So still
mm,
investing in yourself is important. Then press the button with both Carl and I, as you said it, because we're hearing this a lot. The fact that now it's proven, it's scientifically proven, and we're hearing so many guests talk about it in multiple disciplines. Most recently, we had Conrad Smith, one of the most decorated rugby union players of all time, talking about the
mm,
scientific research that proves taking your mind away from your sport has a performance benefit. Being able to focus on something else, to switch off, to clear your head, gives you a performance lift. So the old-fashioned attitude, probably when Carl and I were involved, was, well, it's an either or. I'm either all in investing in my sporting prowess, more training, more kicking, more work in the gym, or I'm not.
mm,
Now you've just alluded to it. Then, well, actually, there's a performance benefit. And then the last thing that I think is really important
mm,
is it gives you control. So you, when the world went upside down with COVID, had a high level of control because you're like, well, I've got these qualifications, I've been investing in myself,
mhm,
versus someone who hasn't made that investment, like, hang on, what am I going to do? I just need to keep doing what I'm doing. That's what I know. So the fact that you've invested in the education gave you more control to then step into this space. So for anybody listening, it's like, well, keep investing in yourself. It gives you control, it gives you options for the future, it makes your transition easier. You can do more things on your terms. And even if that doesn't resonate as highly, because we all think we're young and invincible, do it because it'll help your performance, it'll help you mentally, and it'll help you physically. So I know I'm just pulling out the wisdom you shared there, James, but we
mm.
hear this all the time in our coaching realm. So you start on the athlete program with Morgan Stanley, and then just give us a
Mm.
bit of a flavour. So what do you do now, James, with them? Just give us a snapshot of your role with Morgan Stanley.
Yeah, sure. So I work in sales and trading, so it's on the trading floor. And the program that previously ran here, and I know our competitors have kind of started doing the same, was a ex-professional athlete and ex-military program. And the idea was to take people in from a diverse background in military or sport and retrain them in sales and trading. So either a salesperson or a trader or similar type roles, and kind of give them the platform where they can bring across the transferable skills in a high pressure and kind of fast paced environment. So the program was kind of geared to that part of the bank. And unfortunately, kind of my cohort was the last year of that program, but it's something I'm really passionate about. And I've been speaking with HR about kind of launching something similar to kind of keep that going.
And another thing we love to talk about, and I'm going to throw you back
Mm-hmm.
because you just mentioned it, transferable
Mm-hmm.
skills. So
Mm-hmm.
you've been in that sporting world for so long, James. You've played at various levels, different cultures, different organisations. You played in the Premier League in Ireland, in Scotland. You've been in the Premiership youth structures. So give us a flavour from your perspective of those transferable skills. What comes to mind if we throw that question back to you? What sort of things do you bring from your sporting experience to help you excel in your performance now at Morgan Stanley?
Yeah, I mean, I listened to the sort of recap chat that you guys did yourselves without the guest, and you pulled out some of these key themes. And one thing that you said, James, was the drive that athletes have. And as I was kind of commuting, I was listening, and I thought to myself, actually, that's a great point. I completely underestimated and underplayed the skills that I had joining Morgan Stanley, and it wasn't until 2 or 3 years in that I went, actually, I can see the value that I had that I didn't realize, and I tried to tell players that and educate them they have this power. And the best way to describe it is similar to what I'm sure you guys did as kids and all the other athletes that you've had on. When I was 13, 14, 15, you didn't need to ask me to go out and go for a run, keep myself fit, like on my school holidays, or go out and kick a football. It's just you have that drive. So I take that here, and I recently actually kind of transitioned roles within the firm, and it effectively worked out as starting brand new. And people
Right.
questioned kind of, why would you do that? That's so risky. You've built up these years of experience. And actually, it's just the want of challenging yourself continuously. And so I move into this new role, and it's new to me, and obviously I'm effectively the most junior and the least kind of educated in that sector. But there's that drive that out of hours I'll put in the work and I'll make sure that I'm ready. And I don't think you can buy that. I think you learn that really, and that's through your sport. And maybe sometimes here it's or sort of generally outside of sport, it's underappreciated, that background drive that these athletes have to make sure that they are there and ready to perform in the office frontline when they're called upon.
Yeah, yeah, and I love the way you frame it about it took you a couple of years to appreciate what you already had and what you can bring. Because for people that are listening to the shows, we constantly reinforce the fact: don't expect to have all the answers. Don't beat yourself up. Don't think, well, I haven't got anything to offer. You just need to breathe, reflect. Have the right guidance, mentoring, coaching, etc. But every guest on this podcast is in effect mentoring and coaching the next generation. So to actually step back and go, well, what are my transferable skills? And that very point you've talked about there, that drive, and you framed it beautifully. Like, you get up, you go after it. You don't need to be told to do things. You don't need to be told to improve. And also that little bit of resilience to step through your fear. And your latter point there, it's so indicative of society nowadays. People that's that old analogy of the crabs in the bucket. You get pulled back in. You want to do something differently, and people say, "Why are you doing that? Why would you do that?" Whether that's professionally, personally, why would you do that? They want to pull you back into the bucket with them. And actually to have the courage to say, "Well, I want to do it because I want to excel." And to your point, you're now the most junior and inexperienced in an area, but you've made that move to move forward again. So not fearing the discomfort that comes with ambition and being willing to push through that to find those rewards on the other side. I think that is another key thing that a lot of athletes have got, the willingness to push and to try new things, to try and improve.
I can't remember what guest it was that you had on there, but you guys were discussing a story about someone who was educating their kid, basically saying, if you want to go to training, I think it was swimming actually, but the name eludes me, and it was like, well, you have to wake me up at whatever it is, 6 a.m. I'm happy to bring you. And I thought to myself, I wonder whether I'm going to take that tack if, fortunately down the line I have kids that want to do sport, if I'm going to kind of put that onus on them or not. But
I think that was Chris, wasn't it, Carl? Chris Cook,
was,
I think.
Yeah,
was it? Yeah.
It was talking to Chris, but it was Ian Thorpe.
Was it Ian Thorpe?
Right.
He obviously went on and did all right, didn't he?
Did okay, yeah.
He did all right.
But that drive, you're right, James. You're right. The drive is so important.
Yeah, you mentioned, James, that part of the Morgan Stanley transition program was you were the last cohort, and it's something you're incredibly passionate about. You're chatting to HR about maybe picking things up again and reintroducing this. And alongside your Morgan Stanley role, you're actually incredibly active in the world of transition yourself. You're a mentor with, I believe it's Switch the Play Foundation. Yeah. Just give us an insight into what that entails and who the types of athletes are that you're working with, and what drew you into that space to work with these athletes around transition.
Yeah, sure. So I'm kind of found a way to formalize what I was doing through the Switch to Play Foundation. They've given me an opportunity to be part of this Evolve to Thrive program, which they started this year, where they are targeting athletes that are in a transition period and giving them 12 months of support through programs as well as mentors like myself over a 12-month period. And I was super excited to do this. I'd wanted to kind of formalize what I was doing informally off my own back for the last sort of 3 or 4 years, because it is something I'm passionate about. And I think where this passion comes from, I go kind of right back to the start. And what I mean by that is, I listen to other podcasts that you have and from speaking to other athletes, and I was always extremely envious of the likes of rugby and cricket and athletics, and some of the people that you've had on, like Connor Gilson, JP Cooney, I think, and then Oliver Sumes, a cricketer, that their careers were fortunate to kind of be tied to education. When I was coming through with football, it really felt like one or the other, right? You either had to leave school at 16 and go full time, or you stayed in education. And doing both, I felt a little bit isolated. Some people questioned my commitment to the club, senior coaches at the time, and I think that experience has made me extra passionate about it. So I went back into West Ham recently and was talking to their kind of under 21s about the experiences, and I'm pleased to see how much it has changed. But I wanted to kind of highlight here for people that may be from a football background who go, it's easy for other sports, they're aligned, and I use the term easy flippantly. I know it's not, but when you look at it from the football perspective and the lack of kind of educational support alongside that we had, it's something that I was kind of driven and urged to go and help. So off my own back, I've been speaking to plenty of athletes and also students to kind of offer some guidance just whenever I had time. And then, the opportunity came along with Switch to Play and the opportunity to formalize this mentorship specifically with athletes who are going through transitions. And though that's a broad range of athletes, we've got jockeys, we've got ex-Olympians, rugby players, kind of martial arts athletes, all in this cohort this year. So it'll be really interesting to see how this program gets on this year and whether we can kind of get funding and kind of try and continue it again.
Fabulous. I love it, James. But we both rolled our eyes, but you think back to it's an either or and people questioning your commitment. I sincerely hope that, although it won't necessarily be the case everywhere, that everybody now recognises actually someone willing to invest in themselves, whatever that investment looks like, is something to celebrate, not criticise, particularly now that we know you get a better athlete in a better mental place who can perform more effectively if they're able to switch off. Now, that doesn't always necessarily mean education.
My dad sold me on that when he kind of wanted me to do A-levels. He said to me, it's going to keep you sharp. So I kind of was saying that, and I'm great to hear that he said it's sort of scientifically backed. And I have no doubt he believed that. But I think it was a case at the time of, well, he was able to foresee the pitfalls and the way to sell it to me and the way he sold it to the club. I remember when we were having conversations with them and they kind of weren't keen on this idea of me doing my A-levels. He sold it as it's going to make him a better footballer.
Yeah. And wise beyond his time, without a shadow of a doubt that he was doing that. And perhaps it was a bit of a sales pitch, but I think he will have believed it and he's been proven to be right. And this isn't a judgment or a criticism, James, but if you flip it round and say, well, how many people go off and have a round of golf or go off and sit in the coffee shops post-training? And, well, how does that enhance recovery? I love my golf, but if you're on your feet for several hours in the summer walking around, is that helping or hindering you? There's undoubted benefits to it, but sitting at a laptop or listening to a podcast, you say, or doing some element of education work, it doesn't compromise anything physically, but can help massively mentally. So I think the world is in a better place. There's so many initiatives. We're trying to do our bit in our little niche. And I think the sport is shifting. You talked about West Ham. You're pleased to see that change. I think in the main it is, but nonetheless, we're talking directly to that individual that's trained hard all week. That's got a bit of an afternoon off. Thinks I'll go back and kick some more balls or lift some more weights or watch some more film. There's a law of diminishing returns.
If you don't mind me kind of picking up on a point there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Part of the culture change was I remember the Professional Footballers Association, who I do a lot of work with. It's sort of the charity supporting players, the union as such. They would send people in to help educate young pros and kind of give you opportunities potentially at university in America. And I remember at the time there was almost this facade that everyone was putting on, that in front of the coaches you didn't want to be seen to be engaging too much with this or kind of wanting to follow this in case you thought someone would look at you and go, oh, he doesn't believe he's going to make it because he's kind of thinking about other options. So whether you wanted to kind of engage or not, there was a feeling of, oh, I don't want to be seen to be the only one here who's looking at a university in America. I want to make it at this club and I need to prove to the coaches that I'm going to make it at this club. So just to kind of pick up on that point,
it's a fascinating the psyche's changed, and I think you could link it back to sort of drinking culture, couldn't you? So there's nothing against having a beer with your teammates, and Carl and I have done it and enjoyed that over the years, but I think if you go back 20 30 years, it was expected that in most team sports you had to drink, otherwise you were not buying into the team building ethos. You go into a lot of environments now and people don't drink at all. And that's absolutely acceptable because people are doing what they believe is right nutritionally or not drinking alcohol to improve performance. And I think investing in your education and life beyond sport is hopefully starting to be viewed in the same light. You said before about the either or. It shouldn't be an either or. It's one and the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think given a background of a family from Dublin, I definitely struck a kind of good balance between being able to enjoy myself and play. I mean, my mum and dad were very keen to kind of push me to enjoy myself at the weekends and try not to kind of completely sacrifice what they saw as your childhood. So I probably enjoyed myself a little bit more than some of the other guys, but I don't look back at that with any regret, because I think it was character building, and also, particularly in football, because you're not aligned to an educational structure where you can go through university as much, particularly back then. There's a lot of lads, you just leave home at 15, that's it, you're in digs, and that's it, you go from a boy. And at the time I didn't think I was a boy, but now I look at 15-year-olds and I'm like, hell, you are a boy. And you just leave school and you leave your home, and that's it, you're a man. And you're in an environment with Premier League footballers, England internationals. We were kind of, when QPR were getting kind of fighting relegation, you were in an environment where you had people who were fighting for survival and fighting for paychecks and families and people's futures. And then you go on to do that, in the Premier League in Ireland. I was at the club that ended up getting relegated, and the chairman came in before one of the games and was like, look guys, if you lose today and we get relegated, people are going to lose their jobs, and it's going to affect the community, and there's that pressure that's on you. And I was at that point sort of 19, and you've got someone telling you that if you don't win today, people are going to lose their jobs.
Intense, very intense. And that's that element of you're away and in isolation. Hopefully some of the virtual opportunities that we now have help lessen that a little bit, because I think going back to that timeline, you make a very fair point, James. You can't go into school and be at the training ground, as a 15, 16-year-old. It's that you're in the classroom or you're in the training ground. Hopefully now athletes have got much more resource at their fingertips to try and curate something that works for them, whether that's online learning, exclusively online learning through degrees or master's programs, whether it's consuming podcasts, whether it's watching things on YouTube, whatever it may be. The world is hopefully a smaller place that doesn't make that chasm that you talk about a 15-year-old who's still a boy having to find his way in a man's world. But bringing it back to that educational element, hopefully it's easier to integrate elements of self-development and growth alongside training because of the virtual opportunities. Because as you say, you move to a different country, it's very difficult to find any sort of continuity on the education, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. And it really doesn't take much. I was really conscious when invited back into clubs, what kind of, from my experience in terms of how long you have athletes' attention for and how committed they might be. And I think if you go in and say, right, here's programs you can do, or here's a 6-month course, or this and that, it's a bit daunting. So I went in and I looked up ways where, athletes could do something that would take them 5 minutes a day. So as simple as, I'll use finance as an example, but there's kind of companies that will send you out kind of a market report every morning, and it takes you 5 minutes to read, straight to your email, done. That's it. It can take 5 minutes and you're keeping up to date on the financial markets, as an example. So I kind of went in with things like this because I thought about my time, and as a young pro, you kind of feel like you're dragged into these sessions sometimes. And I want to do this whilst I am young enough and still close enough to the game for hopefully it to resonate with other young pros and senior pros. I don't want to be someone who kind of didn't play football, or is kind of, they don't even know your name. They have to kind of Google you in black and white to find out who you are, and you're going in that the young lads you're not going to resonate with them. So whilst I'm kind of still young enough and hopefully close enough to the game, I want to go in when people can resonate with you.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, as we talk about this a lot, about when you're looking at mentors, coaches, find the one that clicks with you. It's going back to that analogy in our school days, there's certain teachers resonate more than others. There's no one size fits all. One person's ideal coach or mentor might not fit for the next person. So being open-minded, but I love that sort of succinct, brief, if you've got 5 minutes, that start there and build out from there. So you're peppering this discussion with wisdom all the way through. James, if we challenge you to come up with an answer to this next question, which we ask every guest, we talk about a do and a don't. Now, obviously, you've given us a multitude, and maybe you'll reflect back on something you've already said and embellish that or repeat that. That's absolutely fine. But if you were going to say to people who are walking the path behind you, hey, here's something that I would recommend you do to make your transition out of football and into industry more effective, easier, less stressful. And equally, here's something that I would recommend you don't do. Drawing on the benefit of your personal experience or just indeed wisdom that's come to you on your journey. What comes to mind for you on that question, James?
I think I'll start with the latter. I think it's easier to start with what not to do. Because, as people say, do as I say, not as I do. But I think the easiest place to start is don't do nothing. It's as simple as that. Don't do nothing. Because if I found at times that I was scared to think about transition, and I was scared to think about failure, and I was scared to think about, what people would think of me or how I think of myself. And that is, you know, funnily enough, only now that I've transitioned 2 or 3 years, something that I'm going through at the moment in terms of acceptance that this is reality and this is life. And I think part of that issue is that I never actually kind of thought about it, engaged with those thoughts whilst playing. So, it may be a terrifying experience, but it's a bit like cutting your leg or breaking a bone. You've got to go through a little bit of pain or uncomfort to heal and get better. And I don't mean by thinking about transitioning, you're failing. That's not what I mean. I mean, if you don't engage with thoughts or engage with doing 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, if at some point you need to transition, it could be super overwhelming. In an ideal world, you do 5 minutes a day or 5 minutes a week. I set myself a task at the moment of once a week, do something to help my career. And that may be as simple as go across the floor to somebody that I don't usually speak to and go and introduce myself. Simple as that, once a week. But that can get you over those sort of psychological and emotional hurdles of down the line as you think about transitioning, where you get to that point, you go from kind of 0 to 100. So super long-winded answer, but don't do nothing would be my don't.
Love it. For all of us, irrespective of where you are, that latter piece of advice, particularly do something that helps you grow and develop every week. I mean, that's a mantra for any of us, wherever we are, to say, push past that discomfort, push past it. And I think it's not a long-winded answer because it's really pertinent. It's not failure to think about what you're going to do afterwards. It's being professional. It's not accelerating you to the end of your career. The more options you've got for what you do afterwards, the more comfortable you're going to be. Therefore, the better you'll play, and ideally, the longer your career will last.
Yeah,
if there's a big cliff that you're driving towards and it's making you tense and fearful, that will bleed into your performance. So I really like the way you frame that it's not failure to at least consider what comes next.
Well, and to build on that, I said this in an interview with the Professional Football Association, that when you're an athlete, or I found it this way, it's very, very easy to see yourself as the protagonist, the superhero, you against the world, this challenge to become, an elite athlete. And then when you're there maintaining that, I found it very easily to close my eyes and dream about that at night. By giving yourself opportunities and, kind of educating yourself, if you do need to transition, it gives you an opportunity to control the story, right? And maintain the role of protagonist rather than feeling like, right, well, all of a sudden I've dropped out of the game, no control. I'm not the protagonist anymore. I'm not the superhero. I'm a failure. And that sort of little bits every day, or networking and creating opportunities to make a transition as seamless as possible, gives you that opportunity to be the protagonist in your own story. You want to, super corny and cliche, but if you can go into something else and it may not happen straight away. I think you were talking to Connor Gilsland about it, that it may take a few years, but if at that point you close your eyes and you go, right, this is the new story, then great. That's where you want to be, and you want to maintain that control of the story.
Love it.
Just to build upon your point there, James, about you are the protagonist of your own story and you want to be in control of when that time to transition comes. One of the points that James and I always make, and people will hear this reiterated on the podcast all the time, is who says your sporting chapter has to be your best? Because you're only going to be in this world for a finite period. Everybody wants to play for as long as they possibly can. James Hildreth mentioned it a couple of weeks ago. You can't play until you're 65. And unless you do make it to the very tops, the very top echelons of professional football, where you're earning your hundreds of thousands of pounds a week, you're going to have to do something else. It's unavoidable. So we always like to push that narrative of who says your sporting chapter has to be your best. Because if you're of the mindset, well, this is as good as it's ever going to be, you're going to be in a bad, miserable place for a long, long time. So I like the way you frame that about take control of your protagonism and be the leader of your next chapter. And just to that point, you mentioned a few things about reason for transition. And obviously there's loads of different reasons for having to leave your sport: finances, the administration. You actually take the choice to leave yourself, injury. Just take us into the period in which you left football and just sort of give us an insight into the catalyst for why you chose at that point to move on.
Yeah, sure. So for me, it was, I suppose, almost a combination of factors that all came together. And coronavirus gave me the opportunity to just sort of sit back and take stock. And when I looked at where I was, I had a long-term girlfriend, now fiance. I was looking to buy somewhere. I had a kind of closing window in terms of using the education that I had in the back pocket. I don't know kind of how true this was, but I understood something about kind of going out of date and the ability to apply to programs. And I looked at then the trajectory of my career. Although I believed that I could still play at the highest level. I was at Bromley, who are obviously here now in League Two in England, and I thought, well, I'm 27, kind of turning 28. Best case scenario, I've got a few years left without injury and kind of without being released. And it was a real head versus heart decision. And speaking to other athletes, it's a bit like yourselves. You either fall on one side, Cole, you kind of injury, or you go out on your own terms. But actually, I was in a unique position where, because of the education that I'd done, I'd given myself opportunities, and it was almost like a blessing in disguise. Sometimes I was like, if I didn't have this education, I wouldn't be in this horrible position making a decision. But actually, it gave me the opportunity to apply to a firm like Morgan Stanley, and I'm forever grateful for the opportunity to go from, the probably most difficult to get into high performance sport in the world to a super high performance job kind of outside of sport. And ultimately, I came down on the decision of head over heart for those reasons. Then that's really the decision that was made.
And to your credit, James, a huge amount of courage, because one of the things that we see a lot is people getting trapped in that limbo state. They want to make a change, but they're not quite brave enough to do it, so they play another contract. They stay a bit longer. Their body's starting to fall apart, or the fulfillment, their enjoyment's no longer there, but it's what they know, it's how they pay the bills, and they stay. So that classic heart and head, the fact that you took that, because you could undoubtedly have kept playing, without a shadow of a doubt, but you made that brave decision. So it's to your credit, but again, you said it perfectly. You had the ability to be brave because of the investment and the time you'd spent preparing yourself. Now
just to jump in, I'd say that I didn't. It was hard to let go. I did actually go back into professional football for a few months. I went back over to the Premier League in Ireland, joined UCD, who'd only just beat Villarreal in the Europa League the season before, because I couldn't quite let go yet. I had to go back and do a few more months playing, in front of big crowds and on the TV, and having my young cousins kind of playing with me on FIFA, little things that they were old enough to then appreciate. I wanted to kind of go back and get that last little juice of the adrenaline in front of the crowds, and kind of have my younger cousins remember me for being on their PlayStation games and being on the telly. And I kind of just needed a couple of months. So I did make the decision with head, but I kind of quickly retract, did a few more months, and then finally came to it. Like, it wasn't a kind of, I sort of dipped the toe in before I fully jumped ship.
Yeah, and I think that's completely natural, and I don't think there's probably any sportsman or woman in the world that doesn't occasionally have those whimsical, oh, I miss it. You miss the high points, but what most people say is they don't miss struggling down the stairs on a Sunday morning, or the soreness, or the injuries, or the rehab, and the travel. There's lots of things, but you'll never. We hear it a lot, you'll always miss the banter, the spirit, the insides of the dressing room, those moments when everything clicks. So it's completely natural that you couldn't just flip a switch and move on. But it's been a great discussion, this, James, because we're bouncing all over the place. And Carl and I are always guilty of taking people down tangents and left fields. But I haven't forgotten the fact that I said to you a while back there, the do's and the don'ts. And you went for the latter first. You went on the don't. So let's bring it back to the do. You've given some great wisdom and advice, as I said when I framed this question originally. But what's the number one do that you would advocate to people who are preparing for that transition?
It is to create opportunities. And I know that that's a huge blanket statement, but by kind of creating opportunities, what we've discussed already is you control that narrative. So creating an opportunity can be as simple as networking. And, you've mentioned on previous podcasts that, you know, people like professional athletes, and they're willing to give you opportunities. Sometimes you just need to ask. I think in my professional sporting career, I didn't ask enough. I didn't ask for enough favors. And I found that actually outside of sport, I found it so much easier to lean on people and ask for these opportunities. And I kind of look back on it and wish I did more of that in football, but that would be my do. It's create opportunities by asking. You know, you don't get, as I start saying, you know, you can't score if you don't shoot. You can't, you know, win the lottery if you don't buy a ticket.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you've got to ask for the opportunities. And other people have given much better advice. So I wanted to keep it a little bit more sort of high level and something that, you know, anyone could listen to this and go, yeah, well, I can ask. I know this person, and they might be connected to that person, and it's just giving people the encouragement and, to use what you said, the kind of bravery to go and ask these questions and ask for the opportunities.
Yeah, love it, love it. So on the subject of advice, we're starting to throw in a little quick fire wrap up to these interviews, James. So best piece of advice you've ever been given. It might be professionally, it might be outside of football, within football, but if you had to pull out one piece of advice from somebody, what stands at the top of that list?
I would say, I mean, I think about it in my football career, some great piece of advice, but given we're talking about transitions, I think it's the best piece of advice I was given was try and see the value that you bring as an athlete. And as I said, I didn't see that for the first couple of years, but that was the best advice I was given in hindsight. And, you know, we're not going to cover off all the things that we've kind of discussed and you discussed on other podcasts, but that is the value that you have, the ability to work under pressure, the teamwork, the drive, all that sort of stuff that you just innately create and grow as an athlete in a high performance sport. If you can see that value that you bring to the workforce, that's great. And that was a piece of advice that I only see how good it is in hindsight.
Yeah, as with most advice, hence the benefit of being able to share it like we're doing now. So that's a great one. Now, the next one, there's a little bit of synergy here. It's maybe a bit too similar, but nonetheless humorous. See what comes to mind. We've shamelessly stolen this from Tim Ferriss, whose podcast is just a bit bigger than ours at the minute. And one of the things he's asked to, not for long. I like your spirit, James. I like your spirit. One of the things he's spoken to guests about is if you could put one of your own pieces of advice on a billboard on one of the major motorways in the world, and it's there with James Daly underneath it, and that wisdom's going to everybody that drives past. So this is tapping more into you versus the first question, which is advice that's come to you. What would go on your billboard? What would be the message or the piece of advice that you would put out to the world?
Oh, that is... I think I come up with my best material at about 2 o'clock in the morning when I'm lying in bed. I come up with these great inspirational quotes. If I could just have a quick nap, I'd probably come up with something great. I'm torn between kind of putting the time in and acceptance. Two things that I'm kind of big on at the moment. I think, you know, I read a book by Matthew Side, I think you pronounce his surname, Olympian table tennis player, and it's called Bounce. It's called The Myth of Talent and the Power of Hard Work. And he has me utterly convinced that, you know, innate talent doesn't exist, and time kind of basically your environment and your sort of commitment / motivation equals the outcome. And that is probably the advice I'd go. I'd literally just on the billboard, I'd have, like environment plus, you know, your sort of commitment equals outcome. That's what I'd have, because I think that whole sort of 10,000 hours idea or concept and being in an environment where you get to practice and you get to drive can't be beaten. There's, you know, in my mind, there's no such thing as talent. It's really just how much you dedicate yourself to it, and you know, you need to be supported by that environment. So that would be my advice. Get yourself in the right environment and work hard.
Another great one, and that book's behind me here. I've always loved that because I feel it removes a lot of excuses. I think it's very easy to say, well, I can't do it because I'm not as talented as that individual. If we step into that notion of, well, how hard are you willing to work to improve your performance, then it debunks that a little bit. So that's a perfect segue, James, into most impactful book that you've read. It can be absolutely anything, but if you were recommending a book to the listeners, to Carl and I said, I would give you this book. It might be Bounce, it's a great book. Is there a book that comes to mind when you say, well, that's really had a major impact on me, and I would recommend that to anybody? What comes to mind there?
It would be that book, Bounce. I think it really helped with my transition as well. I only read it after I left professional football. And he talks about as well the power of practice, or kind of purposeful practice. That's it. You know, there's a section in the book when he talks about, he says, right, you know, if there's two ice skaters, you've got an Olympian figure skater and an amateur figure skater, who do you reckon falls over more in training? And people would expect, you know, the amateur who's learning, but actually, no, it's the Olympian, because it's purposeful practice. They always push themselves a little bit further to continue kind of make those gains. So now, you know, I'm kind of not on a pitch anymore. So I kind of fill my time with golf and the gym, but it's that idea of purposeful practice. So you go back and, you know, if you lift 10 kg, you go and lift 12 kg, or you know, you're doing something at work and you come up with, you know, an idea for a client. It's, well, next time is, can I make that idea a little bit more successful? Can they get, you know, X amount of returns versus that? So that book has just taught me a lot about, as you said, debunking talent, the idea of hard work, and what is just an awesome idea is that idea of kind of purposeful practice. Just, you know, not just turning up and doing it, but kind of really putting purpose behind it in everything you do.
Right, fabulous. Great answer. Great set of answers. And, you know, that billboard came to you. Maybe there'll be another one comes to you at 2 a.m., as you say, when your brain comes alive. But
I'll go back with a row of them for you.
Yeah. Put the whole highway there. But James, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. If people want to connect, which I'm sure they will do, obviously you're giving up a lot of your time and you're involved in these different programs. But where's the best place for people to find you? Would that be LinkedIn? Is that the best way for people to connect?
It would be, yes. Many years ago, back when I was 18, I got rid of all social media, so I'm not a Facebook, Instagram, Twitter kind of whatever TikTok guy. It's Instagram. It's LinkedIn. So that would definitely be the best place. Yeah,
best place. Now we can edit this bit out, James, but just out of curiosity, because you are booking the trend there. But do you mind sharing why you disconnected from all of that social media?
Yeah, sure. So it was, I think, a little bit to focus on myself. I think that, you know, some people are quite fortunate that they have great support networks with friends and etc. growing up. I think I had some, but also not some kind of great support there. And I wanted to be in a situation where I focused on myself, and a combination of, you know, just sort of interactions and reading about yourself. So, you know, a lot of fan interaction or club interaction, and I didn't want coaches kind of seeing what I was doing on the weekend, etc. was the start of it, and then it just became something that I got used to. I quite enjoy not needing to post about something, or, you know, I can kind of live in the moment. Super cliche, I know, but I kind of don't envy people that feel like they have to be connected to their phone. And, you know, it started as a sporting thing, you know, to sort of focus on myself and not be distracted by comments from fans or comments from other people. And it's now become a kind of self-esteem type, you know, lifestyle change.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. And it's just nothing to do with the podcast, really. It's just, but it's interesting content for people, because going right back to the point we made repeatedly about investing in yourself, one of the barriers to people doing it, hopefully the world's moved on and it's no longer seen as an either or. Do I invest in myself or invest in my sporting disciplines? It's more an internal barrier of, I don't have time. A lot of us in sport and outside of sport are fighting against this notion that I don't have time. But actually, if we challenge ourselves and look at our screen time usage and look at where we deploy time on a daily basis in some of those apps and things that you've shut down, it takes a lot of time. You're talking about, can you find 5 minutes a day to invest in you? Well, yes, the answer should be yes. So I think I was interested because, yes, you had a sporting context. Now it's more of a growth and development driver, I think, isn't it? That you want that time for you.
It's transitioned to that. Yeah. I mean, I looked at, you know, I still liked to see what fans said about me. I mean, mainly the good stuff. But I look at, you know, myself and Jack Grealish were playing for Ireland together, and obviously we have English accents, and ultimately he switched to England.
Yes.
And I look at what he went through during that transition. So, people at similar ages to me, as well as then when we were, at QPR was a good grounding because the fans there were really passionate, but also were not happy when things weren't going well, if the performances weren't right. And, as a Premier League side with, we had the Rio Ferdinand, Sean Wright Phillips, Taiwo's, Jibril Cisse's, when we spent all that money and we were down the bottom of the Premier League, I looked at what players were going through. And initially, it was a sort of self-preservation and kind of, well, let's stay off social media because, I don't need that sort of negativity. But it's transitioned perfectly into what you said is that sort of self-esteem and lifestyle change now.
Yeah. No, fabulous. Just a quick tangent at the end. We did a few as we went through it, James, but I think it's always interesting to get people's perspective. No, don't apologise. It's been a fabulous insight. I think this is how people learn. They've heard from you. They've heard about your journey. I think we admire the courage that you took to step out. You've gone from one high performance environment into another, as you've rightly said, and you're giving something back, and you mentor and support people on the way as well. So thank you very much.
I managed to last about an hour before I started name dropping. I thought I nearly made it through the whole podcast. I know that some others are taking a bit of stick for getting the name drops in early. I thought I'd leave it to the last minute instead.
There's absolutely no. It's important. Joking aside, it's important because it helps set a context. It shows people where you've been. If everybody goes super humble, doesn't talk about anybody they've ever played with or any of their experiences, well, it makes the content a little bit drier. I think to the credit of everyone, including yourself that's been on, we don't see any arrogance. People are not saying, look at me, but it does help give a bit of context to moments of advice and pieces of advice. We had James on, 20-year career at Somerset. We asked him about the best piece of advice. It came from Ricky Ponting, who was his captain, one of the greatest Australian cricketers of all time. Everybody listening with half an interest in cricket go, oh, well, what did Ricky Ponting have to say? So I hear what you're saying. You weren't name dropping. You're setting some context, and it's been a pleasure talking to you, James. So thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Yeah, cheers, guys. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us this week on our ATA podcast. If you found this conversation insightful and it resonates with your journey, please subscribe, follow the show, and stay connected with us for more insight, resources, and information on how we at ATA are supporting your preparation for life beyond the game.